Before burgers, dogs, and watermelon became 4th of July staples, New England Yankees celebrated with salmon and peas. Today, I'll tell you why, share some insight into how this old Yankee tradition found its way into presidential history, and make the meal across the harbor from a presidential summer home on this week's summer rerun of Making a Mess with the Yankee Camper. Creamed salmon and peas over rice. Although creamed salmon with peas is a traditional New England Independence Day meal, I've assembled the ingredients from all over the country. The first ingredient that you'll need is 1/4 cup of white rice, and I've selected Carolina brand white rice. This is grown in the USA and is distributed by companies in Texas, but there's a number of states that grow the rice. Carolina was where rice first came to the United States. The next ingredient is 1 5-ounce can, undrained, of pink salmon from Alaska. We have a 8.5-ounce can of sweet peas. These are from California, and those ingredients will be mixed into a package that is going to have creamed salmon spices. And this is 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, also a product of the USA, 1 teaspoon of butter granules. These are from New Jersey. 1/4 teaspoon of dill, a dash of white pepper. Black pepper may be substituted, but white pepper is preferred. And all of these products have a USA packaging or distribution. You will also need 1/4 teaspoon of salt. This is from Canada. And a 5-ounce can of evaporated milk. This is licensed from Switzerland. All of these ingredients will go into a bag that is marked creamed salmon with rice, creamed salmon with peas over rice. And the first thing you'll want to put in is the canned goods. So we'll place in the salmon, the peas, and I noticed that the salmon will need a can opener. The evaporated milk will also need a can opener. We'll go ahead and put in the rice and all of the mixed spices. We'll seal this bag up, and it will be ready for us when we're out in the field to prepare our creamed salmon with peas over rice.
On opening day of the season in 1912, Carl Anderson, a Bangor, Maine house painter, pulled the first 2 salmon out of the Penobscot River. One, a 16-pounder, he sent to William Campbell Clark of the Clark Thread Company in Newark, New Jersey, who would pay the highest price for it. But the second he packed in ice and sent as a gift to the White House. William Howard Taft, who summered just across Beverly Harbor at Woodbury Point, graciously accepted the present and, not being a small man, consumed the whole 11-pound fish, poached along with cream sauce and a garnish of parsley. American newspapers reported on the gift to Taft, and thus began an annual tradition of sending the first Atlantic salmon caught on the fly to the President of the United States as what became known as the Presidential salmon. The Bangor tradition continued through most of the following presidents, although in 1925 President Coolidge missed out due to a communication kerfuffle with the fish market. He did receive others, including one presented to him by Maine Senators Fred Hale and Arthur Gould. In 1916, Jeanette Sullivan, who I could not locate a photo of, was the only woman who snared the coveted presidential salmon from the Bangor salmon pool for Woodrow Wilson 4 years before she was legally allowed to vote for any president. FDR was the biggest winner, having received 12 presidential salmon during his 13 years in office. But by the 1960s, the salmon population had dwindled to almost non-existent. Although Richard Nixon never got a fish, it was under his watch that Maine Senator Muskie pushed through the legislation for the Clean Water Act, reducing the Penobscot's pollution by 80%. By the mid-70s, the salmon were back, but the nails were already going into the coffin. President Reagan received his first of the seafood in 1981, and several more besides. When his vice president was elected, George H.W. Bush, who had a place in Maine, may have had an inkling that he would be the last to receive the highly prized gift. The Atlantic salmon population was still on the decline internationally. In 1992, knowing that the president was at his compound in Kennebunkport, Maine, Claude Westfall and his wife Rosa May packed the first catch of the season in ice and drove 3 hours to personally deliver the ocean's silver to the president and Barbara Bush. That was the end, however. In 2000, the king of fish was placed on the endangered species list and remains there to this day, forcing an end to the 80-year tradition. Organizations such as the Atlantic Salmon Federation and Trout Unlimited are hopeful that someday the presidential salmon will again be awarded with an increase in the fish's population, but that may take decades, if ever. Now you know. Let's head out to Salem Willows and start making our lunch.
I hope you're enjoying this video, and if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know it runs on coffee. I don't receive any compensation for these. I do these because I want to share my love of New England with you and talk about the places that I go camping. If you'd like to support my channel, you can buy me a cup of coffee. I'll put the link right over here. Now, let's get back to watching the video. I'm here at the Salem Willows Pavilion in Salem, Massachusetts. If you hear sounds going on in the background, that's because they are working to build out a new pier at Salem Willows. Today I'm going to make creamed salmon with peas over rice. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get out our ingredients, and we have the creamed salmon spices, our can of sweet peas, can of evaporated milk, the rice, and of course the salmon itself. And we'll need some other ingredients as well, and that would include a lighter for the stove, a spoon to stir, a can opener for opening the salmon, and a church key can opener to open the evaporated milk. You should also have a pot holder and a dish for your meal when it's ready. Today we're going to be using my small mess kit, which includes a metal plate, measuring cup, pan, and lid, and a frying pan. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to need to cook the rice. And to do that, we'll start out by opening the can of peas and draining the liquid into the measuring cup. Set the can of peas aside for now. And that measures about a half a cup of liquid that's in the peas. Now, if you don't have a half a cup of liquid, you can just use your water to top up to a half a cup. And we're going to pour that right into the pot. So let's light the stove. And I'm using the propane stove today. This is a single burner stove. It's available pretty much anywhere. And we're going to just place the pan onto the heat, put the cover on. So it's been about 5 minutes or so, and you can see that water is boiling a little bit. We're going to take our rice and we're just going to empty the rice into the pot with the liquid from the peas. Make sure you get all of the rice in there and then stir that up so that all of the rice is covered. Now you'll want to reduce the heat to low because the rice doesn't want to boil, it just wants to simmer. You want to reduce it to almost off. Now, if while it's cooking, the lid starts to pop, then your temperature is too high and you'll have to reduce it some more. That's going to take about 15 minutes for that rice to cook through.
Wild peas have been around for more than 10,000 years, but they weren't the sweet garden peas we're familiar with today. They were typically dried and then processed to separate the hulls from the seeds. The split peas we still use in pea soup are probably closer to what our ancient ancestors would have recognized. I even made a pea soup recipe back in September 25 in my Making a Mess series. When we picture hunter-gatherers, however, we typically see a group of men with spears hunting a woolly mammoth or standing on a riverbank spearing fish. But that's only half the story. It tends to diminish the role of the gatherers, often women, who collected other foods like wild peas. In fact, those gathered foods may have been what kept people alive when the hunt didn't bring home the wild boar bacon. Now, that doesn't mean salmon and peas were being served together in ancient times. Their histories began in different parts of the world. By the time the Romans occupied Britain, peas were already being grown there, and Atlantic salmon spawned in the rivers. The Roman cookbook, known as Apicius, even included a recipe for Vitellian peas, a heavily seasoned pea dish associated by name with the famously extravagant emperor Vitellius. And we know the people in Roman Britain ate salmon. So the two foods certainly existed in the same world. But as far as I can find, they never really had their peanut butter and chocolate moment until the middle of the 19th century. The timing was perfect. Garden peas, much like the sweet peas we know today, were ready around late June, just as Atlantic salmon were running upstream. Because both were fresh at the same time, salmon and peas became associated with the 4th of July, especially here in New England. Peas have been part of the colonial diet from the beginning. The settlers at Jamestown brought them as a food crop, and the Pilgrims also relied on peas as part of their early food supply. So, by the time New England developed its own food traditions, peas were already well established here. Growing up, we traditionally had salmon and peas in a cream sauce with potatoes for the 4th of July. My dad told me he'd eaten it growing up, and I assume his dad had as well. My ancestors on my dad's side came from Maine near what is now Arcadia National Park, and they were both farmers and mariners. So it's possible my family had been eating some version of this combination for generations. Unfortunately, my grandfather died before I was born, and my dad left us almost 30 years ago. So I have no one left to ask. They just left me hanging. There's a lesson in that. Ask about your family history before you can't. Fresh salmon and fresh peas both had a very short window, which made serving them around Independence Day all that more special. Of course, the peas I grew up eating came from a can, and so did the salmon, before they were combined in the cream sauce. Not quite the same as fresh caught and freshly picked. If you wanted to create something closer to that old seasonal experience, it is possible, though probably not inexpensive, but that's what special occasions are for, right? You can still buy sweet garden peas grown in New England soil during their peak season in late June, and Atlantic salmon is still available, although these days it's farm raised. Now you know. Let's head back to Salem Willows and finish making lunch.
Now you can see that over here there's still some bubbles, so that rice is almost done. We're just going to let it go for another minute or two. While that rice is finishing up, let's go ahead and move to the next step. First thing we're going to do is we're going to open our can of salmon. Drain the liquid from the salmon right into the frying pan. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add into that right now. Be sure to shake the milk so that it gets completely mixed. Then, using your church can opener, add that to the frying pan as well. And stir that in. While that rice finishes up, I'm going to mix in the dill and the cornstarch into a cream sauce. You want to give that a good stir to make sure that all of that cornstarch is broken up. So as you can see, the rice has essentially absorbed all of the liquid. So we're going to remove this. It's been about, a little more than 15 minutes. We'll give this rice a little bit of a stir, and then we're just going to let it sit. That will continue to absorb the remaining amount of liquid. Well, we go ahead and finish off the recipe by putting the cream sauce onto the heat. Now it's important that the heat is low because you don't want the milk to boil. So we're going to place that cream sauce right here on the heat and make sure that heat is low. And we'll just continue to stir it to assure that all of the cornstarch has been broken down and is part of the sauce itself. Now it just needs a gentle stir. As that cream sauce starts to thicken, go ahead and add in the can of peas and just stir that right in. And also add in the Alaskan pink salmon. Stirring that in as well. Reduce the heat and let that continue to thicken. Give it a try and see how warm it is. Needs a little bit more time. Once that cream sauce is thickened, go ahead and remove it from the heat and turn off the stove. Take your dish and spoon the rice into your dish. Now, spoon the cream sauce over your rice. And you have a traditional New England 4th of July meal. As Julia Child would say, bon appetit. If you got something out of this video, I'd appreciate it if you take a moment and give it a thumbs up. It just lets YouTube know that you enjoy the content that I'm putting out. If you'd like to see more of the recipes that I make in my mess kit, the places that I camp around New England, what I'm baking in my 90-year-old camp oven, and some of the gear that I use, take a moment to subscribe. I try to put out a video every week. If you have any thoughts or comments, leave it in the comment section. I try to read and answer every single one. In the meantime, I hope you'll get outside, and thank you for watching. Hey, that tastes a little like tuna casserole.